the timeless New Year's tradition. The snow fell in silence, blanketing the Mayfair village in a pale hush that muffled even the faintest whispers of the world. Evelyn Mayfair stood by the frosted window, her breath clouding the glass as she watched the villagers gather in the square. Lanterns of delicate paper, painted with curling vines and strange symbols, rested in their hands, ready to be offered to the starless sky. Every New Year's Eve, the ritual brought the town together. A ceremony both familiar and steeped in unspoken reverence. Evelyn had always found the lanterns beautiful, but this year something felt different. The markings on her own lantern seemed alive, shifting in the dim lamplight of her bedroom. She traced a finger over one of the shapes, a swirl that twisted into a jagged crescent. Her grandmother, Agnes Mayfair, had been particularly stern this year, forbidding Evelyn from tinkering with the lanterns before the ceremony. "You must respect the Everlight Pact," Agnes had warned, her voice low and heavy with significance. "When the 12th chime sounds, you release your lantern and leave the rest to the stars. Nothing more." Evelyn's curiosity, however, was not so easily quelled. That evening, the family gathered in the parlour, the flickering hearth casting long shadows on the walls. Evelyn's younger brother, Oliver, sat cross-legged on the rug, clutching his lantern eagerly. Her parents spoke in soft murmurs, their words drowned by the occasional crackle of firewood. Agnes, wrapped in her wool shawl, sat in her armchair like a sentinel, her piercing gaze fixed on Evelyn. "Grandmother," Evelyn ventured, holding up her lantern, "what do the markings mean? Why are they different every year?" Agnes's expression tightened, and for a moment Evelyn thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, her grandmother leaned forward, her voice low and deliberate. "They are not for you to understand, child. The lanterns bear the echoes of those who came before us. Each marking carries a fragment of their lives, a whisper of their wisdom. To tamper with them is to disturb the balance." Evelyn frowned, her curiosity only deepened by the cryptic response. "But how do the markings appear? And why does the pact matter so much?" Agnes straightened in her chair, her sharp features catching the glow of the fire. "The pact protects us, Evelyn. It has for centuries. Without it, our family's fate would..." She stopped abruptly, her knuckles white as they gripped the armrest. "You are not ready for such truths. When the time comes, you will understand." Her grandmother's tone left no room for argument, but Evelyn felt a strange weight settle over her. There was something Agnes wasn't telling her, something the family had guarded for generations. Midnight crept closer, and the village square buzzed with quiet anticipation. Lanterns bobbed like luminous fireflies, their warm light casting a golden hue over the snowy streets. Evelyn stood among her family, clutching her lantern as the town's clock tower began its steady tolling of the hour. 11 chimes echoed through the crisp night air, and the villagers raised their lanterns in unison, preparing to release them on the 12th. Evelyn's heart raced. She looked at the markings on her lantern, and for the first time, they didn't seem like decorations. They seemed like warnings. She glanced at Agnes, whose gaze was fixed on the sky, her lips moving silently as if in prayer. The 12th chime rang out, and one by one the villagers released their lanterns. Evelyn hesitated, holding hers tightly as the others floated upward, their soft glow forming a constellation of light. "Evelyn!" her grandmother hissed sharply, her eyes blazing with urgency. "Let it go!" Startled, Evelyn released her grip, and the lantern rose into the sky, joining the others in their ascent. For a moment, she felt relief. Then she noticed something unusual. Her lantern hovered, spinning in place, as though tethered to an invisible string. A cold wind swept through the square, extinguishing the candles of the lanterns below. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the night darkened, save for Evelyn's lantern, which flared brighter. Its markings pulsed with light, casting eerie patterns on the snow. Agnes's face turned ashen. "What have you done?" she whispered. Before Evelyn could respond, the lantern shot forward, its light carving a path into the forest beyond the village. The crowd stood frozen, their breaths clouding the air, as Evelyn felt an inexplicable pull to follow it. Though her family called after her, Evelyn took a step toward the woods, her curiosity now outweighing her fear. She didn't know it then, but this New Year's Eve would unravel the truth of the Mayfair legacy and change their lives forever. The forest stood like a silent cathedral, its towering trees forming an archway above Evelyn as she ventured deeper into the unknown. The lantern hovered ahead of her, its pulsing glow cutting through the thick darkness. Snow crunched beneath her boots, each step echoing unnaturally in the stillness. Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was alive, listening, waiting. Behind her, the sounds of the village faded, swallowed by the weight of the night. She hesitated for a moment, turning back toward the flickering lights of home. But the lantern drew her gaze again, its glow intensifying as though urging her onward. Something in its light felt familiar, comforting even, despite the strange energy it radiated. As she walked, Evelyn noticed the forest seemed untouched by the snowstorm that blanketed the village. The ground here was bare, covered instead by a layer of frost that shimmered faintly. The trees bore no ice, their bark smooth and dark, as if they had been waiting untouched for centuries. The lantern came to a sudden stop in a clearing, hovering above a mound of snow-covered stones. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary pile of rocks. But as Evelyn approached, she realized they formed a crumbled altar. Its surface was etched with markings, symbols almost identical to those on her lantern. She reached out to touch the carvings, and the moment her fingers brushed the stone, the lantern flared blindingly bright. A voice, soft and echoing, filled the clearing. "Do you seek the truth, Evelyn Mayfair?" She gasped, spinning around. No one stood behind her, yet the voice remained, resonating as if it came from the trees themselves. The lantern lowered itself onto the altar, its light dimming to reveal a faded journal beneath it. Tentatively, Evelyn picked up the book. Its leather cover was worn, the corners frayed, but the initials HM were engraved on the front. Her heart raced. "Henry Mayfair," she whispered. The name of her great-grandfather had always been shrouded in mystery. Agnes spoke little of him, mentioning only that he had been the first to light the lanterns, the one who began their family's tradition. But why was his journal here, in this place? And why had the lantern led her to it? Evelyn opened the journal carefully, the brittle pages crackling under her touch. The handwriting was precise, yet hurried, as though written in moments of urgency. The first entry chilled her. "The pact is sealed. Our family is safe, for now. But the Watcher has warned me, the bond must never be broken. Should the lanterns fail to rise, the forest will take us back. This is our debt for the protection they grant." Her eyes scanned the following pages, piecing together fragments of Henry's story. Decades ago, their village had faced a harsh winter that threatened to destroy them. Crops failed, and illness swept through the town. Desperate, Henry ventured into the forest, seeking help from a figure he referred to only as the Watcher of the Vale. The Watcher had offered a bargain. The Mayfair family would serve as guardians of the Everlight Pact, ensuring the lanterns were lit each year to maintain a connection between the living and the spirits of their ancestors. In return, their family would be blessed with protection and prosperity. But the pact came with a warning, one that Henry repeated over and over in the journal. Never tamper with the symbols. Never abandon the ritual. And never seek the veil unless summoned. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she read the final entry. "There is a crack in the bond. I feel it growing. Should it break, the forest will remember. It will come for us." The forest around her seemed to grow colder, darker. The voice returned, now closer, almost tangible. "The Mayfairs have forgotten their vow. The lanterns falter. Will you mend the bond, Evelyn, or will you leave the truth buried?" I don't understand," Evelyn stammered, clutching the journal tightly. "What truth?" The lantern flickered and Evelyn saw a vision flash before her eyes. Her family standing at the edge of the forest, their faces pale with fear. A shadow loomed behind them, formless, yet filled with menace. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Evelyn shaken. "The bond is fragile," the voice intoned. "Your family's fate lies in your hands." Evelyn looked down at the journal, its pages trembling in her grasp. Her great-grandfather had kept this secret, protecting the family through generations. But the journal had found her now. Was it a warning? A summons? As she stood before the ancient altar, Evelyn realized there was no turning back. Whatever the bond meant, it was unraveling. And the answers she needed lay deeper in the forest, in the truth her family had long sought to forget. The lantern's glow began to shift, no longer steady and warm, but flickering as if caught in a silent storm. Evelyn clutched the journal tightly to her chest, its brittle pages suddenly feeling heavier than before. The forest seemed alive now. Branches creaked, though no wind moved them, and the faint sound of whispers swirled around her. The clearing where she stood no longer felt like part of the world she knew. It was as though she had stepped into a place where time wavered, stretched, and folded back on itself. The voice returned, distant but commanding. "Step forward, Evelyn Mayfair. The veil is thin. It is time." Before she could respond, the lantern floated up from the altar, its light carving a path into the dense forest ahead. Evelyn hesitated, the weight of her great-grandfather's warnings echoing in her mind. Yet the pull was undeniable. Each step felt as though she were moving through water, the air thickening with every breath. The world around her blurred, colours bleeding together until the forest dissolved into something altogether unearthly. She emerged into a place that defied comprehension. The trees were no longer trees, but towering pillars of shimmering light, their branches forming fractals against a sky that pulsed with colour. Shadows danced across the ground, though no figures cast them. The air buzzed with energy, alive with whispers too faint to understand. Evelyn realized with a start that she wasn't cold anymore. The icy grip of the forest had given way to a warm, almost oppressive stillness. At the center of this strange realm stood a figure cloaked in light. It did not move, yet Evelyn felt its gaze upon her, ancient and knowing. The lantern floated toward the figure, hovering at its side like an obedient sentinel. "You have come," the figure said, its voice resonating like the chime of a bell. "The last of the Mayfairs to seek the truth." "Who are you?" Evelyn asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound brave. "Are you the Watcher?" "I am the bridge," it replied, "the keeper of the Everlight Pact. Your family's bond to this realm is fragile. I have watched as it frays year by year, secret by secret." Evelyn clutched the journal tighter. "My great-grandfather, he made the pact. Why? What did he trade for it?" The Watcher tilted its head, its form shifting like liquid light. "He sought salvation for your bloodline. The Mayfairs were chosen as guardians, protectors of the bond between the living and their past. Through the lanterns, your ancestors lend their wisdom and strength to your family, ensuring its survival." "And the curse?" Evelyn pressed, the vision of her family's pale faces still vivid in her mind. "The journal said there's a crack, something about the forest taking us back." The Watcher's light dimmed slightly, as though in mourning. Your family's bond was never meant to be eternal. Over time, the Mayfairs forgot their purpose. The lanterns became mere ritual, the pact reduced to tradition. But the forest remembers, it watches. Without the bond, the shadows will return to claim what was once theirs. Evelyn felt a chill despite the warmth of the realm. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The watcher extended a hand, and the journal flew from her grasp, its pages flipping open to reveal a blank parchment. The lantern's glow dimmed, its light condensing into a single point that etched words onto the page. The pact must be mended, a choice must be made. The watcher's voice softened. "You carry the weight of your ancestors, Evelyn Mayfair. To restore the bond is to accept their burdens, to guard their wisdom and their pain for generations to come. Or you may sever it and free your family from its duty. But be warned, without the bond, the shadows will no longer be kept at bay." Evelyn's mind raced. The pact had protected her family for centuries, but at what cost? The journal spoke of sacrifice and fear, of a curse that loomed over them like a storm cloud. Yet severing the bond felt reckless, dangerous. Could she risk unraveling something she barely understood? "What will happen if I choose wrong?" she asked, her voice shaking. The watcher stepped closer, its form now towering over her. "There is no wrong choice, only consequence. The lantern has brought you here because you are the one destined to decide. But choose swiftly, for the veil cannot hold forever." Evelyn's breath quickened. The symbols on her lantern flickered again, their light casting ghostly shadows that twisted and danced in the air. She felt the weight of generations pressing down on her, 1,000 voices whispering all at once. The realm around her began to quiver, as though reality itself strained under the pressure of her indecision. The journal hovered before her, waiting for her to make her mark. The watcher extended its hand once more, offering a small flickering flame. "One path binds, the other frees. The choice is yours, Evelyn Mayfair." Evelyn stared at the flame, her heart pounding. Whatever she decided, there would be no turning back. Evelyn stood frozen, the flickering flame suspended before her like a living heartbeat. The watcher's words echoed in her mind. "One path binds, the other frees." Her hand trembled as she reached toward the flame, but just as her fingers grazed its warmth, a sudden gust of wind howled through the realm, carrying with it a haunting melody. The journal in front of her began to glow, and the blank page filled with moving images. Visions that sprang to life as though plucked from the very fabric of her family's past. Evelyn stumbled back, her breath hitching as the faces of her ancestors emerged in vivid clarity. The first image showed a woman standing in the same clearing where Evelyn had found the altar. She was younger, her dark hair pulled tightly back, her hands shaking as she lit a lantern. Behind her, shadows crept at the edge of the forest, their forms indistinct yet menacing. The woman whispered a prayer as the lantern rose, her voice strained with desperation. Evelyn recognized her as Evelyn Mayfair, her great-great-grandmother. The whispers in the air sharpened, echoing the woman's voice. Let the pact hold. Let the forest sleep. The image shifted, showing a young boy crouched in the same parlor where Evelyn's family had gathered earlier that evening. He stared out the window, his face pale as he watched lanterns rise into the sky. A shadow loomed behind him, and Evelyn's chest tightened as she realized it was Henry Mayfair. His journal had described this moment, when the bond first began to fray. Henry's voice trembled through the whispers. The watcher's light fades. I must hold the bond myself. If I fail... The scene dissolved before he could finish, leaving Evelyn with an ache in her chest. The visions came faster now, each one a fragment of her family's history. A young woman clutching a lantern in the snow, her face streaked with tears. A group of children huddled in the dark, their eyes wide with fear, as shadows moved beyond the windows. Her mother, standing beside Agnes, both of them lighting their lanterns with trembling hands. Evelyn's knees buckled, and she fell to the frost-covered ground. "Why are you showing me this?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "What am I supposed to do?" The watcher's voice was soft now, almost sorrowful. "Your family's legacy is built on sacrifice, Evelyn. Each lantern carries the wisdom and pain of those who came before you. Their courage sustains the bond. But it has also bound your family to fear, to secrecy." "I don't want their pain," Evelyn whispered. Her voice faltered as she looked at the journal, the glowing images now replaced by a single line scrawled in bold script. "The bond is your burden, should you choose it." The watcher stepped closer, the flame in its hand flickering. "You have seen the truth. To restore the pact is to honor their sacrifices, to give their struggles meaning, but to sever it..." The watcher's voice deepened, its tone grave. "To sever it is to free them, and to leave your family vulnerable to what lies beyond the veil." Evelyn's mind spun. The visions had shown her the strength of her ancestors, but also their suffering. The lanterns had saved her family for generations, but they had also chained them to a dark and dangerous secret. Could she carry this burden? Could she risk severing the pact and facing the unknown? Her fingers brushed the journal again, and another vision flashed before her eyes. Her family, as they were now, gathered in the village square. Agnes stood stiffly, her gaze fixed on the forest as though she sensed the unraveling bond. Oliver clutched his lantern tightly, his small hands trembling. Evelyn's parents stood behind them, their faces pale with worry. The vision shifted, showing Evelyn herself, standing in the clearing at the edge of the forest. Her face was different, older, hardened by the weight of years. She held a lantern aloft, its glow dim, as if struggling to stay lit. Evelyn blinked, and the vision disappeared. "The bond must be tended," the watcher said. "It is not a gift, but a responsibility. Only you can decide if your family will bear it." Evelyn's heart thundered in her chest. The flame in the watcher's hand flickered again, casting long shadows that danced like restless spirits. She thought of her great-grandfather's warnings, of the shadowy forms that crept at the edges of her vision. But she also thought of the strength in her ancestors' eyes, the way they had faced the darkness for the sake of those who would come after them. Slowly, Evelyn reached out and cupped the flame in her hand. It did not burn her, but its warmth spread through her chest like an ember stirring to life. The watcher inclined its head, and the lantern rose once more, its glow steady and strong. "You have chosen," the watcher said. "The bond will hold. But remember, Evelyn Mayfair, the pact is not eternal. It lives only as long as your family's courage." As the light of the lantern grew, the realm began to fade. Evelyn's surroundings blurred, and the forest reappeared, dark and quiet once more. The altar stood before her, unchanged, but the journal in her hands now glowed faintly, its pages blank again, waiting for her to write the next chapter. The forest was silent as Evelyn stepped out of the clearing, the lantern now trailing softly behind her like a patient guardian. The weight of her decision still sat heavy on her chest, but a strange sense of calm had replaced her earlier fear. The pact was mended, yet the watcher's parting words lingered. "The bond is not eternal. It lives only as long as your family's courage." The journal in her hands pulsed faintly, its blank pages now warm beneath her fingers. Evelyn knew it wasn't empty, it was waiting. Her story, her chapter in the Mayfair legacy, had only begun to be written. The forest seemed different now, its shadows less menacing, its silence less foreboding. Yet she felt the presence of her ancestors around her, their whispers fading into the stillness. The village square was eerily quiet when Evelyn emerged from the woods. The lanterns the villagers had released earlier were gone, their light extinguished. Her family stood near the fountain at the center of the square, their faces pale with worry. Agnes was the first to notice her, her sharp eyes widening in a mixture of relief and something deeper, an understanding. "Evelyn," Agnes whispered, stepping forward. Her voice trembled, uncharacteristically soft. "You went to the forest. You found the watcher." Evelyn nodded, holding up the glowing lantern. "The bond was breaking," she said quietly. "I saw the truth, the pact, the sacrifices, everything we've been protecting." Agnes's expression softened, and for a moment, Evelyn thought she saw tears glimmering in her grandmother's eyes. "Then you know what we carry," Agnes said, her voice thick. "The burden and the blessing." "I do," Evelyn replied. She glanced at Oliver, who clung to their mother's side, his eyes wide with fear and curiosity. "But I don't think we've been carrying it the right way." Her words hung in the air, the silence stretching as the rest of the family exchanged uneasy glances. Finally, her mother stepped forward. "What do you mean?" she asked hesitantly. Evelyn held up the journal. "We've been lighting the lanterns following the ritual, but we've forgotten why. We've hidden the truth of the pact, even from ourselves. It's not just about protection. It's about honoring those who came before us, their courage, their sacrifices. The lanterns aren't just symbols. They're a connection to our past, a way to learn from it." Agnes's shoulders slumped slightly, and she looked away, her gaze fixed on the snow-covered ground. "We hid it because it's painful," she said. "The mistakes, the fear, the cost. I thought it would be easier for you all not to know. But hiding it didn't stop the bond from fraying," Evelyn said gently. "The Watcher told me the pact lives only as long as our courage does. If we're too afraid to face the truth, we'll lose everything." Agnes seemed to shrink under the weight of Evelyn's words. The silence stretched again, broken only by the soft crackle of Evelyn's lantern. Then, with a deep, steadying breath, Agnes nodded. "You're right," she said. "It's time." She reached into the folds of her shawl and pulled out a small weathered box. Evelyn recognized it immediately. It had always sat on the mantel in their parlour, untouched and locked. Agnes opened it now, revealing a bundle of old letters, sketches of the lantern symbols, and photographs of Mayfair ancestors Evelyn had never seen before. "These are the stories we hid," Agnes said, her voice low but resolute. "They're yours now, yours to tell, yours to carry." Evelyn felt the weight of the journal in her hands, but this time it didn't feel heavy. It felt purposeful. She looked around at her family, at the flickering hope in their eyes, and she knew what had to be done. That night, the Mayfair family gathered in their parlour, the firelight casting warm, dancing shadows on the walls. Evelyn sat at the centre, the journal open before her as she began to write. She recorded the vision she had seen, the words of the Watcher, and the stories Agnes shared from the box. Each sentence felt like a thread weaving her family's past, present and future together. When she finished, she looked up to find her family watching her, their expressions a mixture of awe and pride. Even Oliver, who had been so fearful before, now held his lantern with steady hands. "The lanterns aren't just for us," Evelyn said softly. "They're for everyone who came before us, and everyone who comes after. As long as we remember, the light will never fade." When midnight came again, the Mayfair stepped outside. The square was still and quiet, the snow glistening under a sky scattered with stars. Together, they lit their lanterns, each one bearing the intricate, shifting symbols that now felt like a language they were finally beginning to understand. As the lanterns rose into the sky, their warm light banishing the cold darkness, Evelyn felt the presence of her ancestors once more, not as whispers or shadows, but as steady guiding hands. The pact was whole again, and for the first time in generations, the Mayfairs weren't just following a ritual, they were embracing it. The lanterns floated higher, their glow becoming one with the stars, an eternal light that would guide the Mayfair family for years to come.